Hi everyone, this is TeachMADude coming to you with another video. This one is going to be somewhat of a hot take for many and somewhat controversial, and that's okay. In this video, I'm going to talk all about pronouns and parental rights. I think that's what I'm going to name this one. And so what I'm going to break down for you is how do I handle students when it comes to pronouns, particularly students who might identify as maybe transgender or non-binary. And I have personally never had experiences with parents that are, some of the parents who are strictly against, calling their kids by different pronouns, at least not those that would admit to it, but kind of how I might suggest for those living in some more conservative states to handle these kind of uncomfortable situations, and kind of my philosophy about that, because I think this is something that's very important for us as teachers to dive into as we think about doing what's best to educate our students. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so basically, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, we have to kind of straddle an difficult kind of set of circumstances here. So on one hand, we have this idea that students need to feel comfortable, loved, and supported in their learning environment, and they have to be respected as people and as students. If you don't have that, then you're not going to have students who are bought in, and you're not going to have students who want to learn. Think about it like this. If someone made you feel uncomfortable, are you going to want to do what they're asking you to do? And I would say no, they're not. And that's a very normal human thing. We would approach that as adults. We wouldn't feel comfortable. So we can only imagine students are going to feel similar. On the other hand, we do have an important, role in terms of we don't want to project so much of our own opinions onto students. And we also have to remember that it's important to have a relationship with parents, guardians, and caretakers so that we can all work together as partners to ensure that the student's reaching their full potential. So in my opinion, I believe we got to put the student first, right? I've done a lot to talk about the triangle of accountability, and the student plays an important role in that. So in my opinion, I believe that if a student wants to be called by a particular pronoun, I will honor that if that is not the pronoun that they normally go by. I've had a number of transgender students who in my career have said, look, I would like to be called this, and they're very forthcoming about it. And, it's important to me that my parents don't know about it and they're very anxious about that. And I think that what we have to understand is that there could be for cultural reasons or for parental belief, the kid doesn't feel comfortable with their parents knowing that they might identify as non-binary or as transgender. And I think that it is our responsibility as teachers to honor what's going to make the kid feel safe, supported, and comfortable in our learning environment. So I will do personally, if a student asks me, hey, it's okay if you call me this, can you please call me this? But, when anything like in the emails or when my parents inquire, I want you to call me by, my, birth name or whatever my name. To me, I don't see a problem with that. And I know it's a very hot take. I know that parents are going to say, well, this is my kid's name. This is the name I gave them. You're indoctrinating my kid, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, I'm not telling anything to the kid. I'm not telling the kid to feel a certain way. I'm not telling the kid to do anything. I'm simply acknowledging the request. And I would put it back on parents and ask them, why do you feel that your child is asking me and is so anxious about having you not know about it, right? Why does the student want to take pains to put their birth name when they communicate by email to ask me to make sure that I only use their birth name and their, sex oriented, so to speak, pronouns rather than the ones they would prefer? Why is it that they feel that they can't be comfortable being who they are with the people who gave birth to them, but they're perfectly comfortable doing that with their teachers. I put that back on the parents. I don't think it's personally indoctrinating. I'm not telling the kids you should identify in a certain way. I don't ever tell the kids anything. At the same time, I understand that as a heterosexual male, right? I'm what many people would consider quote unquote normal in terms of my, sexual preference. And as a cisgender male, in terms of my gender identity, right? Many people consider that quote unquote normal. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who aren't very accepting. And I understand that in that regard, right? When I think about my own gender identity and my sexual preference, right? It's easy for me to sit back and say, well, I'm comfortable talking about, my, marital situation and, what's happening with my relationships, because people aren't going to necessarily perceive that in the same way as if I said, I have a husband, versus if I talk about my wife to my students sometimes. But again, I think I think maybe I would be more hesitant if I was talking about my husband instead of my wife. Should I have to say terms like my partner so that I don't have to kind of allude to the fact that my partner is same sex? Well, as someone who's a heterosexual, I don't have to worry about that. So I think that it's really important that we share our relationships and share ourselves and what we do as humans, as long as that is appropriate. But I think that unfortunately, sometimes when you don't follow some of what society might consider to be quote unquote normal, you run into situations where people will accuse you of trying to indoctrinate your kids by normalizing, so to speak, what they might see as sexually deviant behavior. Personally, I don't find that really holds water for me philosophically, but I think that it's something that, unfortunately, as teachers in 2023, it's going to be something that we're going to see coming up. So what I would say now at this point is, how can we as teachers go about situations where we must disclose if the student has a different gender identity than their birth certificate, and if the parent is pushing on that? So there's a couple things that I would suggest. The first is, as a teacher, you might want to try to have a one-on-one conversation with the child, or push them to have a one-on-one conversation, maybe instead of trying to put things in writing. So as and I'm thinking about a teacher in like Florida or Arkansas, where if you must tell the parent. So in that case, I would say, and it's unfortunate, try not to be put in a position of knowing in a way that is on a written record or anything that can be traced back to. If you're having a one-on-one conversation with a student and it's in person, there's no way to actually say, yes, I know that they are something. There's no proof. The student is not going to out themselves. So it's and no one else has seen the conversation. So it's very unlikely that it's going to be put in a light that, oh, he knew and didn't disclose it. The other thing I would suggest is, if you're concerned, as a blanket statement, I've now tried to use more inclusive pronouns overall. I tend to prefer to refer to students as they. So like this is how they're doing. And if I try to stick to that as more of like a blanket way of dealing with things, then that kind of puts it in a position where it's not going to arouse suspicion as to whether I'm using they, because I use that for everyone. And so that could be another strategy you could use. I think at the end of the day, if the student wants to do anything, and this has never been in my experience, but if they want to do things like they're thinking about transitioning, I think, in my opinion, as a teacher, that is not something that you should personally be assisting them with, because I think, again, it's very controversial, and I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of potential, conflict. I've heard of cases where guidance counselors have been giving students, chest binders if they're female, thinking about transitioning to male, and parents finding that and then going off the rails. And respectfully, while I understand the position that the child is in, and I understand and I can only imagine the mental health struggles they face because they don't feel that they can be who they are, I really think that it is going over the line to be giving kids things like chest binders as a guidance counselor without trying to involve more people in the conversation and really without the parent knowing about that. Because there is a point where the parent, unfortunately, even if it's a bad decision that I don't agree with, does have like a right to consent or not consent to what you're doing with their kid. And while it does put the kid in a very difficult position, I think to some point, getting back to the triangle of accountability, the parent has to own the fact that their decisions are putting their kid in this place. And them choosing to not be accepting of who their kid is causing their kid to feel a certain way, right? As teachers within the classroom, it's our responsibility to make sure that the kid feels supported. The kid feels like that I'm here and I love them and I care about them and I want them to grow. But I also have an obligation to include everyone in the conversation and, to the greatest extent possible, to keep everyone in the loop, right, about what's going on. And again, in my career, I've had probably a handful of students very strongly ask me to never tell the parent about, them being transgender and then wanting to go by another name. And I've always respected that. I've never even come close to outing any student, and I never would. And I think that that has very positively contributed to our relationship. That's important and that helps them learn. Because again, if you don't feel that you can be who you are in a classroom, you're not going to respect that teacher. You're not going to want to be part of that learning environment. And ultimately, that is going to cause more harm than it's going to cause good. And that's something that we want to think about. So again, I know this is a hot take. I'm sure there's things that I've missed. I really encourage you to like and subscribe and leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going. This has been another episode of TeachMADude. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.